They said we were gone. Wiped out. Erased. Just another dead species the Sentinels left behind like ash in the void. But humanity had one last answer, and it wasn't a weapon. It was a star. If you love stories where humanity refuses to die, hit that like button, subscribe to HFY Endurance Tales, and drop in the comments. We are not extinct. Because what these aliens were about to face wasn't an army. It was the weight of the universe itself. Let's move forward into this forge. The stars had gone quiet over what remained of human space, not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that follows a massacre, the kind where debris fields stretched for 10,000 kilometers and distress beacons had long since run out of power, the kind where entire colony worlds had been reduced to glassy rock, their atmospheres burned away by weapons that humanity still didn't fully understand. Commander Ethan Cole floated in the observation bay of the ISV Perseverance, his coffee growing cold in his grip, staring out at the wreckage of New Carthage. What had once been a thriving terraformed world home to 400 million people was now a gray, silent sphere. No lights, no signals, no life, just another Sentinel calling card. Calling it a cleaning operation, said Lieutenant Marcus Webb from behind him, his voice flat and hollow. Intercepted Sentinel comm burst, translated about 6 hours ago. That's the word they used, cleaning. Ethan didn't turn around. 400 million people. Yes, sir. A cleaning operation. Yes, sir. The silence between them said everything that words couldn't. Ethan finally turned, setting his cold coffee against the magnetic wall bracket. He was 43 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of gray creeping into his temples that didn't come from age, it came from war. 3 years of watching humanity lose. 3 years of retreating, regrouping, and watching the retreat lines get shorter every time. The Sentinels weren't like anything humanity had theorized in centuries of SETI research. They weren't biological in any conventional sense. Their bodies, if you could call them that, were partially crystalline, partially constructed, grown in the gravity furnaces of their homeworld over geological timescales. They didn't breathe. They didn't sleep. They processed energy directly from stellar radiation and communicated through quantum-entangled crystalline nodes embedded in their hull structures. And their ships were the same material. Grown, not built. Crystalline lattice structures of alien origin that had resisted every conventional weapon humanity had thrown at them for 3 straight years. Thermal weapons dispersed across the surface like light through a prism. Kinetic rounds shattered on contact, the energy absorbed and redistributed through the lattice. Nuclear detonations, humanity's most powerful conventional weapons, had cracked a few outer hull sections on the smallest Sentinel scout ships, but against a full warship, against a dreadnought, the explosions were absorbed like a pebble thrown into the ocean. Humanity had tried everything. Rail guns, antimatter charges, focused gamma bursts. Nothing penetrated, nothing stopped them, and so humanity ran. In 3 years, the Sentinel advance had pushed human civilization back from 47 active star systems to 11. Colony worlds abandoned. Research stations destroyed. Deep space outposts gone dark one by one like candles snuffed out by an indifferent wind. The Galactic Council, a loose political body of 7 alien species who had made contact with humanity roughly 60 years prior, had watched the Sentinel campaign with the kind of detached horror that told Ethan everything he needed to know about their intentions. Species like the Velhari and the Droon had issued statements of solidarity. They had sent diplomatic envoys. They had passed resolutions. They had not sent ships. The council met again yesterday, Marcus said, pulling up a holopad and setting it on the table between them. The Velhari representative formally proposed classifying humanity as a protected remnant species. Ethan stared at the words on the pad. Protected remnant species. The bureaucratic language for something much simpler, extinct. They think we're already gone, Ethan said quietly. 43 billion people at peak. We're down to roughly 9 billion, scattered across 11 systems. By their metrics, Marcus paused. By their metrics, we're already in the extinction bracket. Ethan walked slowly to the tactical table in the center of the room and pressed his palm flat against the surface. The star map bloomed into blue light above it, 11 remaining human systems, surrounded on 3 sides by the advancing red icons of the Sentinel fleet. The geometry was brutal, simple, final. Unless something changed, humanity had perhaps 18 months before the last colony worlds were reached. Maybe less. Not wrong to think we're finished. Ethan said, not if we keep fighting the way we've been fighting. Marcus watched him carefully. You said if. I did. 3 weeks ago, a transmission had arrived at the Perseverance from a source that had taken Ethan's intelligence team 4 days to authenticate. It came from Dr. Raymond Holt, the most decorated astrophysical engineer in human history. A man who had been officially listed as killed in action 14 months prior when the Sentinel fleet had destroyed the research station at Kepler's Run. Holt was alive, and he had built something. The transmission had been 6 minutes long. Most of it was raw data, schematics, orbital calculations, stress tolerances, energy projections. Numbers that had kept Ethan's best analysts awake for 3 weeks straight, running and rerunning the calculations with the kind of obsessive focus that only comes when you're staring at something that shouldn't be possible. But the numbers kept checking out. Every single time. Ethan pulled up the final image from Holt's transmission on the tactical table. The star map shrank, replaced by a structural schematic that looked less like an engineering diagram and more like something drawn by a god with too much ambition and not enough fear. The Starforge, Ethan said quietly. Marcus stared at the schematic. Is it real? Ethan looked at the numbers one more time, checked them in his head the way he'd checked them 100 times over the past 3 weeks. It's real, he said. And if Holt is right about what it can do. He let the sentence hang in the air between them, because finishing it felt too large for a single room. Because finishing it meant humanity wasn't extinct after all. It meant humanity was about to become the most dangerous thing in this galaxy. But getting to Holt, getting to the Starforge, meant crossing 4 light-years of space that the Sentinel fleet was actively patrolling. It meant moving 9 warships through a corridor so dangerous that 3 separate admirals had already declared it impassable. And it meant doing all of it before the Sentinels finished their cleaning operation and turned their attention to the last 11 human worlds. Ethan straightened up from the table. He looked at Marcus with the particular expression that his crew had learned to recognize: not recklessness, not desperation, but something colder and more precise than both: calculation. Get me Admiral Graves, he said, and tell engineering I want the jump drives warm in 6 hours. Marcus paused at the door. And if the Admiral says no, Ethan didn't hesitate. He won't. But even as he said it, the tactical display behind him shifted, a new contact marker blooming in red at the edge of the sensor range, moving with the slow, inevitable certainty of a force that had never once been stopped. The Sentinels were already moving, and they were moving faster than the projections had predicted. The jump nearly killed them, not because of a mechanical failure, not because of a navigation error, but because the Sentinels had seeded the approach corridor with what Ethan's science officer, Dr. Aaron Price, called resonance mines, devices that existed less as conventional explosives and more as disruptions in local space-time, triggered by the gravitational wake of a ship entering FTL transition. The Perseverance dropped out of jump inside the corridor with her port stabilizer array shredded, 2 secondary reactors offline, and 17 crew members injured from the shockwave that had ripped through the lower decks like a physical blow. Contacts, called Ensign Tyler Brooks from the sensor station, his voice sharp and controlled despite the smoke still clearing from the damaged panel beside him. 3 Sentinel scouts, bearing 270 Mark 15. They're turning toward us. Distance, 60,000 kilometers and closing. Speed, sir, they're fast. Ethan gripped the armrest of his command chair. 3 scouts. Light by Sentinel standards, wedge-shaped crystalline constructs roughly 400 meters long, trailing the faint prismatic light that their hulls threw off when they were drawing energy from local stellar radiation. Beautiful in the way that a blade is beautiful, purely, functionally lethal. Can we jump again? He asked without turning his head. Negative. Chief Engineer Dale Foster's voice came over the intercom with the particular flatness of a man delivering news he'd rather not deliver. Jump drives are cycling. Minimum 18 minutes before we can spool up again. 18 minutes. Against 3 Sentinel scouts closing at those speeds. Ethan did the math instantly, the way he always did, not with panic, but with the cold precision of a man who had spent 3 years making impossible math work. Helm, full burn, heading 040. Take us into the debris field off the port bow. Lieutenant James Archer at the helm didn't question it. He just flew. The Perseverance surged forward, her main drives burning at 120 LVE% capacity, a number that Dale would scream about later, assuming there was a later, and drove hard into the wreckage field that had once been a human mining operation. Shattered hull sections, the size of office buildings, tumbled slowly in the dark. Frozen clouds of atmosphere vented from ruptured compartments years ago. The whole field was a graveyard, and right now it was the most valuable piece of real estate in the sector. The Sentinel scouts followed. Not slowing down, Marcus reported from the tactical station. They don't have to, Ethan said. Their sensors cut through debris fields like they're not there. They already know exactly where we are. Then why are we going in? Because they know where we are, Ethan said. But they don't know what we're about to do. He turned to Dr. Price, who was already at the secondary science console, pulling up the spectral analysis of the debris field that the ship's passive sensors had been quietly gathering since they'd dropped out of jump. Price was 31 years old, slight, with the nervous energy of someone who had spent his entire career being the smartest person in rooms where nobody appreciated it. He looked up from his console with an expression that was equal parts terror and barely suppressed excitement. The old reactor cores, Ethan said. Are they still radiating? Price checked his display. 3 of them, yes, low level, but yes. The containment failed years ago, so they're venting hard radiation in irregular pulses. Can you model the pulse intervals? Price's fingers moved fast. Already on it. A pause. Yes. Pattern isn't random, it's a harmonic resonance with the rotation of the debris field. Every 47 seconds, all 3 cores align and vent simultaneously. And what does that do to short-range crystalline resonance sensors? Price stared at him, then looked back at his data, then stared at him again. It would create a localized interference bloom, Price said slowly. About 3 seconds of complete sensor whiteout for any crystalline-based detection array within 20,000 kilometers. 3 seconds, Ethan said. 3 seconds, Price confirmed. Marcus was already ahead of it. You want to use those 3 seconds to fire our entire forward rail battery into a focused point convergence pattern, the way you did at the Battle of Threshold Ridge. Not at the scouts, Ethan said. At the debris. Silence on the bridge. You want to throw the debris at them, Tyler said from sensors, his voice carrying the particular tone of someone who had just realized they were serving under a genuinely dangerous kind of mind. A crystalline hull resists directed energy and shaped explosives, Ethan said. It disperses and redistributes force across its lattice, but it's still a physical object subject to physical laws. You hit it with enough mass at enough velocity. The lattice can't redistribute kinetic energy fast enough, Price finished, his voice climbing. If the impactors are large enough and fast enough, the redistribution rate gets overwhelmed. It's not about breaking the crystal, it's about saturating it. 30 seconds to resonance pulse, Tyler called. Rail batteries stand by, Ethan said calmly. Target acquisition on the 3 largest debris sections in our forward arc. I want them moving at maximum velocity toward the lead scout on my mark. The bridge crew moved with the practiced efficiency of people who had stopped questioning Ethan Cole approximately 2 years and 9 months ago. Pulse in 10 seconds, Tyler counted. 9, 8, batteries ready, Marcus confirmed. 7, 6, 5, Ethan leaned forward in his chair, watching the sensor display where 3 red sentinel contacts were closing with smooth, unhurried confidence. 4, 3, 2, fire. The Perseverance shuddered as her forward rail batteries discharged simultaneously, 6 separate impact drivers hurling chunks of ancient mining infrastructure, some pieces weighing 40,000 tons, into accelerated trajectories toward the lead Sentinel scout. The crystalline hull saw them coming. It prepared to redistribute. And then the radiation pulse hit, and for exactly 3 seconds its sensors went white, and the redistribution cycle never completed, and 40,000 tons of steel and frozen atmosphere and shattered reactor housing arrived at 4 kilometers per second. The lead scout didn't explode. It compressed. One side of the crystalline hull caved inward in a way that looked almost surgical, a perfect illustration of what happened when the elegant physics of an alien defense system met the blunt, stubborn insistence of mass and velocity. The scout tumbled hard, trailing fragments of lattice crystal that caught the distant starlight like broken glass, not destroyed, but hurt, and the other 2 scouts had seen it happen. They hesitated just a fraction of a second, the kind of pause that no human opponent would ever have noticed, but Ethan noticed ever. And in that fraction of a second, something shifted in the tactical geometry of the engagement. For the first time in 3 years, a sentinel had hesitated. 15 minutes to jump capability, Dale's voice came over the intercom. The 2 remaining scouts resumed their approach, and this time they were moving differently, wider spread, more cautious, using the debris field's geometry against the Perseverance rather than ignoring it. They were adapting. Ethan felt something cold move through his chest. Not fear. Something more precise than fear. They were adapting because he had just shown them something new. And the Sentinels, for all their crystalline invulnerability and their geological patience, had spent centuries encountering species that fought predictably until they died. Humanity had never been predictable. 14 minutes, Dale said, and somewhere in the dark ahead, the Starforge was waiting. They made the second jump with 30 seconds to spare. The Perseverance tore back into FTL with her jump drives running so hot that the temperature in the engine compartment hit levels that Dale Foster described, in his formal damage report, as categorically unreasonable. 2 crew members had minor burns. The port stabilizer array was now operating at 31% capacity, held together by a combination of emergency bracing and what Dale privately called hope and profanity. But they made it. The Kalos binary system opened around them like a cathedral. 2 stars, Kalos A and Kalos B, burned at the heart of a system so gravitationally complex that no species in the Galactic Council had ever successfully established a permanent presence within it. Kalos A was a yellow main sequence star slightly larger than Earth's sun. Kalos B was an orange dwarf, smaller and cooler, orbiting its companion in a slow, elliptical dance that took roughly 42 Earth years to complete. The overlap of their gravitational fields created a landscape of extraordinary violence, tidal forces that shredded anything that approached without precise navigational calculation, Lagrange points that shifted and breathed with the orbital mechanics of the binary pair like living things, radiation environments that fried conventional sensor arrays within hours. It was, by every conventional measure, the worst possible place to build anything, which was exactly why Raymond Holt had built the Starforge there. Got him, Tyler said from sensors, and the relief in his voice was audible. Transponder signature matches. IFF confirmed. It's the Helix station, or what's left of it. What appeared on the tactical display wasn't a station in any conventional sense. It was a structure, something that had grown beyond the original research platform Holt had been given 14 months ago, and evolved into something that had no architectural precedent in human engineering. It looked, in the enhanced optical display, like a series of massive industrial rings arranged along a central spine, anchored to a network of gravitational tethers that were locked with extraordinary precision to the L4 Lagrange point between Collos A and Collos B. It was enormous. Even at this distance, the scale was staggering. How did he build that? Marcus said quietly, and the question wasn't tactical, it was genuinely human, the kind of awe that engineering sometimes forces out of even the most composed people. 14 months, Ethan said, with whatever he had. The docking approach took 40 minutes because there was no safe, fast path through the tidal geometry of Collos' binary. Every approach vector had to be calculated against the current gravitational conditions, and those conditions shifted constantly as the two stars moved through their orbital relationship. James Archer flew it by hand, with Price calling gravitational gradients every 90 seconds, and the Perseverance moved through the binary system like a man picking his way through a minefield. Dr. Raymond Holt was waiting in the docking bay. He was 58 years old, and he looked like a man who had aged a decade in 14 months. His hair had gone from salt and pepper to almost entirely white. His face was deeply lined, his eyes carrying the particular hollow quality of someone who had not slept a full night in a very long time. He was wearing a work suit stained with machine oil and what appeared to be dried blood from a cut above his left eyebrow that he hadn't bothered to fully treat. But his hands were steady, and when he looked at Ethan, his eyes were absolutely, completely clear. "Commander Cole," he said, "you're 9 days later than my projection." "We had complications," Ethan said. "So did I." Holt turned without further preamble and started walking. "Come, I'll show you what I've built." The tour of the Starforge took 4 hours. Not because it was designed for comfort or easy comprehension. It wasn't, but because Raymond Holt had constructed something so conceptually outside conventional engineering paradigms that understanding it required a fundamental reorientation of how you thought about force, structure, and physics. The core concept, stripped to its essentials, was this. The L4 Lagrange point between Collos A and Collos B was a zone of natural gravitational equilibrium, a point in space where the competing gravitational pulls of the two stars created a stable focal zone. Objects placed at L4 naturally tended to stay there, held in gravitational balance without requiring constant thrust correction. Holt had spent 14 months building a structure that didn't just occupy L4, it weaponized it. "Think of the Lagrange point as a lens," Holt said, standing in the Starforge's primary control hub with holographic projections blooming around him like flowers. "Gravity bends space. Space curvature concentrates force. What I've built is an architecture that takes the natural focusing geometry of L4 and amplifies it, deliberately introduces stellar matter from both stars into the focal zone in a precisely controlled sequence." "You're collapsing it," Price said, his voice barely above a whisper. He'd been staring at the schematics for 30 minutes straight, and he looked like a man who had just read something that had permanently changed how he understood the universe. "You're inducing a controlled gravitational collapse at L4. Temporary," Holt said. "The singularity state lasts approximately 4 to 7 seconds before the binary gravitational field destabilizes it and the focal zone resets. But during those 4 to 7 seconds, trillions of tons of force per square millimeter," Ethan said quietly. He'd read the numbers so many times they lived in his head now. "Conservative estimate," Holt said. "The actual figure may be higher. The math gets uncertain at those scales." He paused. "I've never fired it at a ship. Have you fired it at anything?" 3 test runs, 2 on target debris. One on a decommissioned scout hull we recovered from the battle at Kepler's Run. Holt pulled up footage from the third test. It was 11 seconds long. The scout hull, a Sentinel crystalline construct that had survived direct nuclear detonation during the battle, appeared on one side of the recording, positioned in the focal zone. The recording ran for 7 seconds of nothing and then silence, not explosion, not fragmentation, compression. The entire scout hull, 400 meters of indestructible alien crystal, collapsed inward to a point roughly the size of a human fist in approximately 0.3 seconds. The resulting mass was so dense it briefly glowed before the gravitational conditions reset, and what remained drifted inert, unrecognizable, infinitely compressed, in the space where a warship had been. The bridge crew who had gathered to watch the footage were completely silent. "It works," Tyler said finally, the simplest possible sentence, the most necessary one. "It works," Holt confirmed. "But it has a range limitation. Maximum effective focal zone radius is approximately 12,000 kilometers. Anything we want to destroy must be within that radius when the sequence fires. And the charge cycle takes 40 minutes between shots." 40 minutes, Marcus said. "Yes. So we get one shot at the fleet. If we miss, if even a portion of their ships is outside that radius, then they know exactly what we built and exactly where it is," Ethan said, "and they destroy it." The room held that reality for a moment. "We have to get the entire Sentinel fleet into a 12,000-kilometer kill zone," Marcus said. "Every single ship, simultaneously." "Yes," Ethan said. "Commander, the Sentinel fleet in this sector numbers over 400 warships. Getting them to converge on a single point at the same time within 12,000 kilometers," Marcus stopped. "That's not a military operation. That's theater." Ethan looked at him steadily. "Then we put on a show. And somewhere beyond the edge of the Kalos system, Sentinel long-range sensors were already sweeping in their direction, slow, patient, systematic. The same way they had swept across 47 human star systems before reducing them to silence. The question was no longer whether they would come. The question was whether humanity could make them come exactly where it needed them. The plan had a name. Ethan called it Operation Gravity Well. Marcus called it the most insane tactical gamble in human military history. Raymond Holt called it applied astrophysics under extreme duress. Tyler Brooks, who had a gift for the kind of blunt clarity that complicated situations sometimes required, called it throwing ourselves off a cliff and hoping the ground turns into a trampoline. All four descriptions were accurate. The fundamental problem was elegant in its cruelty. The Starforge's kill zone was fixed. The Sentinel fleet was mobile, tactically sophisticated, and had spent 3 years demonstrating that it did not make obvious mistakes. You could not simply position the foe. RGE and Hope 400 warships obligingly sailed into a 12,000-kilometer sphere and waited politely to be compressed into stardust. You had to make them want to be there. Ethan spent 6 days in the Starforge's planning center with Holt, Marcus, Price, and a rotating cast of the Perseverance's senior staff, building a deception architecture so layered that at one point Marcus stared at the complete plan on the tactical display for 3 full minutes and then said, with genuine feeling, "I don't know whether to be proud or afraid." The core of it was this: the Sentinels were methodical. They swept systems in a specific pattern, advanced scouts first, then a perimeter line, then the main battle group moved to the designated elimination point. This pattern had been consistent across every system they had cleared. It was efficient. It had never needed to change because nothing had ever made them change it. Ethan intended to exploit that consistency with ruthless precision. Phase 1. The Perseverance and her escort ships would position themselves at the edge of the Kalos system and broadcast a very specific type of signal. Not a distress call, not a military transmission, but something far more provocative. A full data package, schematics, power readings. spectral analysis confirming the presence of a massive human installation inside the binary system, not hidden, not encrypted, deliberately broadcast. "You want to show them the Starforge," Marcus said during the planning sessions, and the statement carried the weight of a man who was genuinely trying to determine if his commanding officer had lost his mind. "I want to show them something they've never encountered before," Ethan corrected. "Something that reads as the most significant human technological development they've seen. Something that makes 400 warships decide that this target requires their full attention. And if they just bombard the system from outside the kill zone, they won't," Holt said quietly from across the table. Everyone looked at him. "He spent 14 months studying Sentinel tactical behavior from intercepts and battle records," Holt said. "They don't bombardment destroy technology they haven't analyzed. Every significant human installation they've encountered, they've approached it closely. Their crystalline nodes require physical proximity to perform the kind of structural analysis they run on everything they intend to assimilate into their knowledge base." He paused. "They'll come in. They'll want to understand it before they destroy it." "You're counting on their curiosity," Tyler said. "I'm counting on their methodology," Holt said. "There's a difference. Curiosity can be resisted. Methodology is compulsive." Phase 2 was the positioning problem. Getting 400 warships to converge within a 12,000-kilometer sphere required more than broadcasting an interesting signal. It required geometry. The Kalos binary system's gravitational landscape, the same complexity that made it a death trap for navigation, became, in Ethan's plan, a funnel. The L4 point wasn't randomly located. It sat in a specific gravitational relationship with both stars, at a distance from each that produced stable equilibrium. Approaching L4 from any direction other than the three primary corridors defined by the binary orbital plane required navigation corrections so constant and so demanding that even the Sentinel fleet's automated systems would default to the most efficient approach vector, which happened to funnel directly through the kill zone. "The system does the work," Price said, spreading his hands over the holographic star map. "Any fleet approaching L4 will naturally compress into the primary approach corridor. It's not a trap we're setting. It's a trap the physics set 14 million years ago when this binary pair formed. We just needed to put something worth approaching at L4, Ethan said. Phase 3 was the hardest part to hear, and Ethan delivered it quietly, with the kind of stillness that people adopt when they're saying something they've already made peace with. The Perseverance and her 8 escort ships would not be in the kill zone when the Starforge fired. They would be the bait that drew the Sentinel fleet in. This meant positioning human ships inside the approach corridor, visible, actively broadcasting, drawing the Sentinel advance directly toward the kill zone, and then executing a precision jump at the last possible moment to clear the compression radius before the sequence fired. The jump window was 11 seconds. 11 seconds between the moment the last Sentinel ship crosses inside the 12,000-kilometer boundary and the moment the gravitational sequence completes, Holt said, and his voice was carefully neutral. The jump drives need 8 seconds to fully spool from warm standby. That leaves a 3-second margin. A 3-second margin, Marcus repeated. Yes. If the drives are cold, they W. "Aren't be cold," Ethan said. "We run them warm for the entire operation. If we're late getting out, we won't be late." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "You've done the math on this about 100 times, haven't you?" "More," Ethan said. And in the planning hub of the Starforge, surrounded by the dual light of 2 burning stars and the schematics of the most audacious weapon in human history, 9 warship commanders looked at a plan that had a 3-second margin for survival and voted, unanimously, to execute it. Because the alternative was extinction. Phase 1 launched 4 days later. The Perseverance emerged at the edge of the Kalos system and began broadcasting. The signal went out at full power across every frequency band the Sentinels were known to monitor. A clear, clean transmission that painted a picture of exactly what sat at L4. Power readings consistent with a massive gravitational manipulation device. Structural signatures matching the Starforge's ring architecture. Active energy emissions from the stellar matter funneling arrays. It was the most honest deception Ethan Cole had ever constructed. Every piece of data in the broadcast was completely true. They waited 4 hours. Then Tyler's voice, carefully level, contact. Sentinel Advanced Scout Formation bearing 330 Mark V, 12 ships. They're running full sensor sweeps. Ethan leaned back in his command chair and felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not quite confidence. Something more measured than confidence. Something that knew it might still lose but had decided, with perfect clarity, that it had done everything possible to win. "Begin Phase 2, he said, and the trap started closing. But the Sentinel scouts weren't moving the way the models had predicted. They were fanning wider, spreading their formation across a broader arc than any previous Sentinel approach pattern had ever shown. Adapting. Changing the geometry of their advance in real time in a way that suggested, with chilling implication, that somewhere in the Sentinel tactical network, something had noticed the debris field incident and updated the threat profile for Commander Ethan Cole. They were being careful, specifically careful, and the 3-second margin had just gotten a lot more interesting. The next 18 hours were the most precisely choreographed sequence of events in human military history. Ethan watched the Sentinel formation adapt and felt something sharpen in his mind, not alarm, but recalibration. The models had projected a standard approach funnel. What he was seeing was a wider net, a formation spread that was clearly designed to prevent the kind of last-second jump, escape, that the Perseverance had executed in the debris field. They had analyzed the debris field engagement. They had modeled his behavior. And they had arrived at the correct tactical conclusion, that Ethan Cole, when cornered, jumped. So they were positioning to take away the jump window. "Trying to cage us," Marcus said from the tactical station, his voice carrying the particular controlled tension of someone who has just watched the opponent make an unexpectedly good move. "Yes," Ethan said. "The formation spread means if we wait until the full fleet is in the kill zone, we might not have a clean jump vector that clears the compression radius." "I know. So what do we, Price?" Ethan said. "The binary system's gravitational gradient at maximum tidal extension. What's the effect on FTL jump field geometry?" Aaron Price looked up from his console with the expression of a man who had just been asked a question he wasn't expecting, processed it for approximately 2 seconds, and arrived at an answer that made his eyes widen. "The tidal gradient distorts the jump field boundary," Price said slowly. "If you initiate a jump at high tidal extension, the field geometry isn't spherical, it elongates along the tidal axis." He turned back to his console, fingers moving fast, "which means the effective jump field at maximum tidal extension would be—" He stopped. "Price," Ethan said. "It would be elliptical," Price said. "Approximately 3 times longer along the tidal axis than it is wide." He looked up again. "If we position along the tidal axis and the Sentinel formation is spread perpendicular to it, then the elongated jump field clears the Sentinel net," Marcus said. "It clears the net," Price confirmed. "But the elongation also means the field boundary will be inside the compression radius along the perpendicular axis." He paused. "Anyone on the perpendicular ends of the fleet who doesn't have full jump capability won't make it out." Silence. "All 9 ships have jump capability," Ethan said. "Yes, sir. Assuming the drives hold." "Dale," Ethan said over the intercom. "Status on the jump drives across the entire group." Dale Foster's voice came back with the particular texture of a man who had not slept in 30 hours and was running on coffee and professional obligation. 8S. "Hips at full capacity. The Ardennes," a pause. The Ardennes has a drive coil issue. Secondary coil is marginal. At tidal extension jump conditions, there's a 23% chance of drive failure on initiation. 23%. Ethan did the math without expression. A 23% chance that the Ardennes and her crew of 312 people would not make the jump window. He opened a private channel to the Ardennes. Commander Harrison. Cole. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Harrison's voice was steady. He was 37 years old, a Virginia native who had been in command of the Ardennes for 8 months. He had a dry sense of humor and the best damage control team in the fleet. I've already heard Dale's assessment, 23%. He operated on worse odds. Sam, Ethan, a pause. We didn't come this far to sit it out. Run the plan. The line closed. Ethan stared at the tactical display for 3 seconds. Then he turned to Marcus. Adjust Phase 2 positioning to tidal axis alignment. Get me the exact timing window for maximum tidal extension. While the fleet repositioned, the Sentinel advance continued. The 12 scouts had been followed by the perimeter line, 47 warships spreading across the outer edge of the Kalos system, in the methodical pattern that Holt had described, running their crystalline sensor arrays across every detectable frequency, building their tactical picture of the binary system with the slow, comprehensive patience of a species that had never needed to hurry. Then the main battle group began to move. 361 warships. The full operational complement of the Sentinel force assigned to this sector of human space. They moved in the complex formation that Sentinel fleets had always used, a layered geometry that looked organic, like a school of enormous crystalline creatures flowing together. And they moved toward L4 with the comfortable confidence of a force that had never lost. The approach funnel was working. The binary system's gravitational landscape was doing exactly what Price had projected, compressing the fleet's viable approach vectors, channeling the mass of Sentinel warships toward the primary corridor, toward L4, toward the Starforge's waiting focal zone. Raymond Holt's voice came over the command channel from the Starforge, his tone stripped of everything except technical precision. Stellar matter funneling sequence is active. Lagrange focal zone is building. Current compression force is at 11% of theoretical maximum and rising. Time to firing threshold, 22 minutes from full fleet convergence inside the kill zone. Navigation, Ethan said. Time to maximum tidal extension, 26 minutes, sir. 4-minute difference. 26 minutes to the jump window they needed, 22 minutes to the firing threshold. They needed the fleet fully inside the kill zone at the same moment the tidal extension reached maximum, which meant the timing of the Sentinel approach had to be manipulated by 4 minutes. We need to slow them down, Ethan said. Marcus understood immediately. If we retreat, pull back inside the system, their advance rate will decrease. They'll approach more cautiously if they think we're drawing them into something. Controlled retreat, Ethan said. 3 minutes. Just enough to stretch their approach timeline. He opened the fleet channel. All ships execute withdrawal pattern Gamma. 3 minutes, then hold the line. The 9 human warships turned and ran, not in panic. In precise, controlled recession, moving deeper into the system, toward L4, in a way that looked like desperate retreat and was in fact the most deliberate movement Ethan Cole had ever ordered. The Sentinel formation responded exactly as the model predicted. The advance rate reduced slightly, the formation tight, the scouts moved ahead with greater caution. 3 minutes, they held the line. The Sentinel fleet resumed its approach. Kill zone entry, Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. First perimeter ships crossing the 12,000-kilometer boundary. Holt, Ethan said. I see them, Holt said from the Starforge. Focal zone is rising. 31% and climbing. The Sentinel fleet flowed into the kill zone with the unhurried certainty of a force that expected victory. The crystalline hulls caught the dual light of Kalos A and Kalos B and scattered it in 1,000 directions, a spectacle of alien beauty that Ethan watched with absolute focused coldness. 70% of fleet inside boundary, Tyler reported. Tidal extension in 6 minutes, navigation said. Holt status, focal zone at 58%. The singularity is forming. A pause. Ethan, it's working. The math is holding. 80% inside, 90. Full fleet convergence inside kill zone boundary in 40 seconds, Tyler said. And now his voice was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer overwhelming reality of what was happening. 400 alien warships, undefeated across a century of conquest, positioned exactly where 9 human beings and 1 exhausted astrophysicist had calculated they needed to be. Jump drives to full warm standby, Ethan said. Confirmed all 9 ships, Marcus said. Full warm standby. Tidal extension in 4 minutes. Holt, time to firing threshold from full convergence. 22 minutes from your mark. The focal zone needs to fully stabilize. Full fleet convergence in 20 seconds, Tyler said. 15, 10. Ethan Cole placed both hands flat on his command chair armrests and took one breath. Slow, controlled. The kind of breath that exists not to calm fear but to sharpen focus. Mark, he said. Full fleet convergence confirmed, Tyler said. All 422 Sentinel vessels inside the 12,000-kilometer boundary. 22 minutes to firing threshold. 4 minutes to maximum tidal extension. 8 seconds for the jump drives to initiate from warm standby. 3-second margin. They're scanning the Starforge, Marcus said. Active crystalline sensor sweep. They're analyzing the structure. Let them, Ethan said. They won't understand what they're looking at until it's too late. But something in Tyler's voice changed. Sir, Sentinel Command formation, the central dreadnoughts, they're holding position. The outer formation is continuing approach, but the command cluster is stopping. Ethan looked at the display. The 6 largest Sentinel warships, the command dreadnoughts, each one over 12 kilometers long, had stopped at the exact edge of the 12,000-kilometer boundary. 1 foot inside, barely inside. And the crystalline nodes on their hulls were running the most intensive sensor sweep Ethan had ever seen from a Sentinel vessel, a full-spectrum analysis that was, clearly, trying to understand the Starforge, trying to understand what the focal zone was doing, trying to understand. They know, Marcus said quietly, not completely. Not yet. But they were figuring it out. And the command formation was positioned at the boundary by design, close enough to analyze, positioned to escape if the analysis produced an answer they didn't like. 3 minutes to tidal extension, 21 minutes to firing threshold. And in the Starforge's control hub, Raymond Holt's voice came through with a tremor in it that Ethan had never heard from him before, not from exhaustion or fear, but from the particular emotion of a scientist watching something they've spent their entire life working toward become real. Ethan, the singularity is forming. It's beautiful. God help me, it's beautiful. And the 6 dreadnoughts at the boundary began to move, backward. The dreadnoughts were pulling back. 6 seconds of watching them reverse. And Ethan Cole made the fastest command decision of his life. Holt, can you fire early? Raymond Holt's voice came back in under 2 seconds. The man had been awake for 41 hours, and he did the math in real time without hesitation. Focal zone is at 78% of theoretical maximum. Compression force will be lower, roughly 60% of full yield. A pause that lasted exactly long enough for the numbers to resolve. Against crystalline hull integrity at this density of formation. Will it work? On the inner formations, yes. The outer 300 ships, yes. The 6 dreadnoughts at the boundary, another pause. 63% probability of sufficient compression force at that range. 63%. 37% chance that the 6 most powerful Sentinel warships in the sector survived and knew exactly what humanity had built. 2 minutes to tidal extension, navigation reported. The dreadnoughts were 40 seconds from clearing the kill zone boundary. Ethan Cole had spent 3 years making impossible math work. He understood, with complete clarity, that 63% was not a certainty. He understood that 37% was not an acceptable risk when the stakes were the survival of humanity. He also understood that in 40 seconds, 6 Sentinel dreadnoughts would be outside the kill zone with complete knowledge of the Starforge, and that no version of the future where that happened ended well for the 9 billion people still alive in the last 11 human systems. Hold fire. The Starforge fired. What happened next did not look like a weapon discharging. It didn't look like an explosion or a battle or anything that the word warfare had previously meant. What happened at L4, in the gravitational focal zone of the Kalos binary system, on the day that humanity stopped being a retreating species, looked like a small star being born and immediately eating itself. The focal zone collapsed. The controlled singularity that Raymond Holt had spent 14 months building, that Aaron Price had stayed up 3 nights in a row to mathematically verify, that Ethan Cole had staked. 9 ships and 9 crews, and the last hope of his species on it completed. Space folded. Not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech. The geometry of the region inside the 12,000-kilometer radius changed, compressed along the gravitational axis with a force that had no analog in conventional physics, that operated not on the surface of the Sentinel warships, but on the very molecular bonds that held their crystalline lattices together. Bonds that had withstood nuclear fire and kinetic impact, and every directed energy weapon humanity had ever built. Bonds that had never been asked to withstand this. 416 Sentinel warships, everything inside the full kill zone radius, underwent gravitational compression in 0.4 seconds. No explosion, no fire, no dramatic fragmentation. Just the sudden, absolute, silent collapse of enormous crystalline structures into objects roughly the size of a human fist, each one dense beyond any natural stellar material, drifting in the space where a fleet had been. Silence. The 6 dreadnoughts at the boundary. 3 of them compressed with the inner fleet as the wavefront of the singularity caught their trailing hull sections while they were still mid-reversal. 2 were struck by the gravitational gradient at partial yield. Their crystalline hulls didn't fully compress, but the structural damage was catastrophic, both ships venting internal atmosphere and tumbling without propulsion. 1 escaped. 1 Sentinel dreadnought, the furthest along in its reversal, cleared the compression radius by less than 200 meters and survived intact, its crystalline hull undamaged, its sensors having recorded everything. Ethan watched it on the tactical display. The single red contact at the edge of the kill zone, sitting motionless in a field of compressed stardust that had, 12 seconds ago, been the most powerful alien fleet humanity had ever faced. The dreadnought ran a full sensor sweep of what remained. Then it turned and jumped to FTL. "It's gone," Tyler said. "Lost contact." The bridge was completely silent. Marcus Webb stood at the tactical station staring at a display that showed 415 hostile contacts reduced to inert debris markers, and 1 contact vanished into FTL. He stared at it for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "We just killed 415 Sentinel warships." "Yes," Ethan said. "With gravity." "Yes." "Sam," Ethan said, opening the channel to the Ardennes. A long pause. "Still here," Harrison's voice came back. "Drive coil held. Barely. Dale is going to have opinions about this." Another pause, and something in Harrison's voice shifted, the dry professional control giving way, just briefly, to something more human. "We made it, Ethan." "You made it." Across the fleet channel, he heard it, not celebration exactly, but the particular sound of people who have been under extreme, sustained, existential pressure for 3 years suddenly finding that pressure release. Not cheering. Something quieter and more profound than cheering. The sound of people discovering, against all reasonable expectation, that they were still alive and that it was not a coincidence. "Holt," Ethan said. Raymond Holt's voice came through from the Starforge, and the man sounded, for the first time in the entire operation, like he might be about to cry, not from grief. "It worked," he said. "The math worked." "Your math worked," Ethan said. "Every calculation." A silence, then one got away. "I know. They'll come back with more, with adaptations." "I know that too." "Then what did we actually accomplish?" Ethan looked at the tactical display, at the field of compressed stardust that had been a fleet, at the dual light of Kalos A and Kalos B burning steady and indifferent, at the Starforge sitting at L4 with its focal zone resetting, already calculating when it could fire again. "We accomplished the thing we needed to accomplish most," Ethan said. "We proved the math works, we proved the weapon works, and we sent one ship back to tell them that. That's what you wanted, for them to know. I want them to know exactly what happened here. I want every sentinel in the galaxy to run the analysis of that engagement and arrive at the same conclusion." He paused. "That we're not extinct, that we built something that makes their hull technology irrelevant, that the next time they send a fleet into human space, we will be waiting at a gravity well." Holt was quiet for a long moment. "You're not ending the war," he said finally. "You're changing it." "Yes," Ethan said. "From a war of extinction to a war of deterrence. That's the only version we can win long-term." Marcus turned from the tactical station. "The Galactic Council is going to want to know what happened here." "Let them watch the sensor recordings," Ethan said. "Let every species in the Council watch what 415 crystalline warships look like after you run them through a singularity. Let them recalibrate their definition of protected remnant species." In the weeks that followed, the recordings from the Battle of Kalos Binary, as it came to be known, did exactly that. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session 11 days after the battle. The recordings were submitted as evidence. The Velhari representative, who had proposed classifying humanity as a protected remnant species, withdrew the motion without comment. The Droon sent a formal communiqué that used language their diplomatic corps had never used toward humanity before, language that, in direct translation, meant roughly, "We have been paying attention to the wrong things." 3 species that had not previously established contact with humanity submitted opening diplomatic credentials within the following month. The Sentinel advance into human space stopped. Not permanently. Ethan had been honest about that from the beginning. The Sentinels were not a species that made permanent decisions quickly, but the advance stopped, and the silence that followed was a different kind of silence from the one that had hung over the wreckage of New Carthage. Not the silence after a massacre, but the silence of a recalculation. The silence of something patient and powerful, and for the first time genuinely uncertain about how to proceed. Raymond Holt spent the following 6 months rebuilding the Starforge's focal array, increasing the charge cycle efficiency, extending the kill zone radius, and beginning preliminary designs for what he called, with the characteristic understatement of a man who had already built one impossible thing, Starforge 2. Ethan Cole stood watch at the Kalos binary system, with 7 additional warships that the Council's sudden renewed interest in humanity's survival had made politically possible. He ran drills. He ran simulations. He read every piece of intelligence about Sentinel tactical adaptation that his analysts could synthesize. And he waited, not with fear, with the particular readiness of a species that had discovered, in the worst possible circumstances, what it was capable of building. One evening, ship's evening, the arbitrary cycle of light and dark that deep space crews maintained for psychological health, Marcus Webb brought 2 cups of coffee to the observation bay and handed one to Ethan without comment. They stood in front of the viewport and looked out at the dual-star light of Kahlo's binary, painting everything in layered gold. "They'll come back smarter," Marcus said. "Yes." "Adapted." "Yes." "And will adapt faster." It wasn't a question. Marcus had stopped asking questions about Ethan's certainties roughly 3 years ago. "That's what we do," Ethan said. "That's what we've always done." He looked at the stars, the vast, indifferent, physics-governed universe that had, for one extraordinary moment at the L4 point of a binary star system, been turned into the most powerful weapon ever constructed by human hands. Not by brute force, not by greater numbers, by understanding, by 14 months of one man's obsessive calculations and 3 years of a commander's refusal to accept that the math couldn't be made to work. The coffee was still warm. In the distance, the Starforge's running lights pulsed steady and slow, a heartbeat at the edge of the gravity well, patient and ready. Humanity was not extinct. Humanity was not even finished. And somewhere in the dark, the Sentinels were learning what every species in the long history of this galaxy had eventually learned about the particular kind of creature that looked up at an indifferent universe, studied its laws, and then turned those laws into a fist. You did not corner them. You did not underestimate them. And you did not, under any circumstances, assume they were gone just because they'd gone quiet. That's the full story right here on HFY Endurance Tales. If this kept you watching, and I think it did, smash that like button, share this with someone who needs a reminder that humanity doesn't quit, and drop a comment telling me your favorite moment. Was it the debris field, the Starforge firing, that one dreadnought that got away? Because that one ship out there, it's not over, and neither are we. Subscribe and stay with us, because the next story is already waiting.